Welcome, APUSH scholars, to this activity on regional divergence. We'll be taking a look at the Chesapeake colonies versus the New England colonies. This is not a battle royale or a showdown when I say versus, but I do intend for us to compare the two. Both Virginia and Maryland and the Massachusetts Bay colonies were settled by people from England. Yet, they diverged into two different societies. Was this divergence caused by economics? Was it caused by ideas or ideology? Did geography shape them? Or was it something else that caused these two societies to start from a common group of folk and then widely split apart? Using the contents of this lecture or the reading that I've given you, I want you to think about the reasons for the divergence of the two regions, and then we're going to tackle that regional divergence through a short answer question. Let's start with the Chesapeake Model first. In 1607, based on some earlier explorations, the English settled in Jamestown, a swampy area of Virginia, hot and sweaty, and they were searching for money, profit. And they spent a lot of their time at the beginning looking to make that profit, hoping to just find gold randomly scattered on the ground. Quickly discovered that that was not going to work, and were saved in a few years by the advent of tobacco production, starting in 1612, when they discovered that they could grow this noxious weed, and pretty soon people were hooked on it. It is addictive, so that's not really surprising. This is the colony, therefore, built on lung cancer and throat cancer, but it kept them from extinction as a colony. They were not profitable, and in fact, they never really turned a profit despite the vast sums of money poured into them. So that by 1624, this would become, instead of like a Walmart in the wilderness, a corporation in the wilderness, it would become a colony under the control of the King of England. And eventually, Virginia would attain a profitable status. That status of profitability was built on unfree labor. Two kinds of unfree labor. At first, indentured servitude. So people who were desperate to come to the New World but couldn't afford it would have their way paid for them by a benefactor who would then be able to use their labor for 5 to 7 years. And at the time also, to encourage people to come, you would get a grant of land or a head right. Eventually, Virginians switched to race-based slavery. This is going to take the better part of the 1600s for it to settle in. By the 1660s, 1670s, you can see that race-based slavery in Virginia is becoming a much firmer and dominant institution. And as the supply of African Americans, or Africans, because they're not really African Americans yet, increases, you'll soon see that this is a colony which there are numerous African folks, all presumed to be enslaved on the basis of their skin color. At first, the Chesapeake Model was heavily male-dominated. So this is a cancerous frat house, if you want to think of it in those terms. The vast majority of the early settlers were males seeking to get rich. Many of them had some military backgrounds, so they're rough and tumble. If you look at the early laws for Jamestown, they had to pass some laws that would sort of make us blush and think they really had to pass a law for that, such as not urinating and defecating in the streets. There were a lot of fights lots of anger, so much testosterone going around that it was quite a violent world in the beginning. It was not a town-based world, even though Jamestown itself has the word town on the end of it. It's a little more than a fort. The Chesapeake very much becomes a place where you spread out and you separate from one another as you try to build your own farm, grow tobacco, and make some money. Eventually, women do end up in Jamestown, more and more of them. They bring over a boatload and auction them off, essentially. So this will become a little bit more balanced of a world, but it's not at the beginning a place that you think of for family time. It also is a place where there's a lot of violence with natives. Imagine if you were a native indigenous person in this area, to constantly have English people annoying you with demands for food, exploring territory all the time. Why are they in our backyards? Why are they so aggressive? And twice, natives tried to exterminate the Virginians, 1622 and in 1644. Both attempts did not work, but the 1622 one nearly worked. By 1619, the people of Virginia would get to be self-governing. These rowdy, rough-and-tumble frat boys were allowed to elect their own representative government, the House of Burgesses, and that would give them a voice in making their own laws and rules. By 1624, they would be under control of the English crown, still having the ability to make some of their own rules, but with the king's officials more directly superintending them. So this is a world built on huffs and puffs and lots of long-term coughs. Just to show you how deadly this world was, in the 1607 original migration, 104 migrants, mostly men, but a few women. By 1608, only 38 of them were left. At one point, they were reduced to cannibalism and eating shoe leather and rats. 1609, we bring 300 more people over. Yay, 338 folks. By 1610, only 60 of those are left. 1610 to 1624, about 10,000 people are poured into Virginia. These are the white trash I spoke of earlier, as one scholar has called them, the offscourings of the earth. These 10,000 people, by the end of that time period, amount to 1,200. Virginia is a place to go to die. As Virginians adopt tobacco and spread tobacco cultivation up the rivers, they form little tiny settlements. They're not really towns so much as gathering spots, forts, little docks and wharves for people to ship their tobacco down the river and then off to European smokers. You can see this pattern of spread is going to bring them in direct conflict with native peoples who are going to constantly find Europeans in their backyards, as well as Europeans' hogs and horses and cows too. Europeans like Pocahontas, who's the most famous, thanks Disney. Matoaka is her name, you can see here. Alias Rebecca was her baptized name. She married John Rolfe, who took her to England where she died. The daughter of the most potent prince, king, leader, Princeps Powhatan, the Imperator Virginii, is what the Latin says. And here is Powhatan himself sitting on his throne. John Smith famously recorded that he was captured and almost executed by Powhatan, and then Pocahontas saved him, but that story is largely a fabrication and probably misrepresents what was really going on there. Here's an illustration of the 1622 massacre, meant to showcase the violence of the natives. You can see all the English folks look absolutely stunned and startled, like they were sitting down to eat dinner, and then suddenly you just got attacked. Notice This guy over here is continuing to chop wood, even though he's about to be stabbed in the back. I guess we presume he's somehow incapable of hearing or noticing the commotion going on around him, or he's just really intent on chopping this wood. The rebelliousness and general violence characterizing the Chesapeake continued into the 1660s, 1670s, especially as it became harder and harder for indentured servants to leave their former lives as servants, become free, and try to purchase their own land. So if you lived past your 7 years, good luck. Then your hope was to be able to buy your own land and use the tools and supplies given to you by your former master to start your own profitable tobacco growing life. Social mobility worked okay in those early years, but by the 1660s, a combination of high taxes, falling tobacco prices is really starting to squeeze poor people in Virginia. After this point, about the richest 15% of the population will dominate Virginia society. So this becomes a society in which the very, very, very elites control everything. When in doubt, pinky out. You sort of have to imagine these large planters controlling county courts, running all the political offices, representing everyone in the House of Burgesses. The former servants became, well, eager for, challenging this lack of mobility and these high taxes and falling tobacco prices. And their resentment led them to attack Native peoples. They'd always been in conflict with Native peoples, and this one, not surprisingly, started with livestock that wandered into Indian territory. The Indians said, these pigs are in our way, stomping, chewing our gardens, so they killed them, and white folks didn't like that. So it started a series of back and forth fighting. The people living on the frontier then turned to the government of Virginia, those elite rich people, and said, why aren't you protecting us from these natives? And the elite said, well, you'll see, we make money off trade with the natives. And yes, so cheerio. Well, this situation in which frontier poor people feel like they're a little bit abandoned by the Eastern elites emerges into a full-blown rebellion when a newly arrived quasi-elite, Nathaniel Bacon, goes around stirring poor people up. And he says, are you tired of Indian attacks? Are you tired of the elites, those Easterners not listening to you? Well, follow me. I'm Nathaniel Bacon, and I won't live high on the hog. I will bring home the bacon, and I'll make your lives better. So he leads a two-pronged attack. Let's kill Indians, let's attack the elites, and Virginia goes into a full-fledged two-headed rebellion. Bacon failed, though. They did take Jamestown, September of 1676, and then Bacon died of bloody diarrhea. Yeah, what a way to go. Thereafter, lots of the elites started thinking, what is necessary for us to keep Virginia stable so that we don't have to do this again? And one thing is to solidify the status of former indentured servants, poor people, by protecting their rights and making sure that the system doesn't completely ignore them. So we're going to build some white solidarity here between the white elites and the white former servants. And there's a slow shift towards using African slaves. So we're going to import people from Africa and not rely on indentured servitude anymore. Africans are becoming much more in supply, so the prices of buying a slave are going down. People are living longer, so it's a better investment over time if you're going to invest in a human being to treat them as a piece of property. And then that means that it's going to become much more of a situation where you look at someone with dark skin and you automatically assume that they are a slave, that they're not free. Because in early Virginia, there were free African Americans. And those folks were able to make a life for themselves to some degree in their freedom to own land, to get married, to have children. But we're going to see this shift towards the assumption that if you are African, if your skin color is dark, you're not free. Virginians will codify this in the law by making a law that says that the children of African slave women are themselves slaves, and they will pass a law that basically says if you convert to Christianity, it doesn't free you from slavery. So they are tightening the grip on this race-based slave system. As death rates are declining, the supply increases, and then slavery eventually will become a status you can inherit rather than just something that happens to you by virtue of being captured in a war. Early Virginia was a pretty rough and tumble place, so I don't want you to think city and beautiful, gorgeous, like laid out streets like Williamsburg, Jamestown and places and its surrounding areas were rough, and a lot of Virginia was like this. We're going to now shift our attention to north of Virginia, to New England. We're talking Massachusetts. Now, Massachusetts is also settled by English people, but interestingly enough, they're from a particular part of England, Yorkshire, East Anglia. So this side of England here, north of London, and a few West Country folks, but mostly Yorkshire and East Anglia. Those people will come to Massachusetts, and you can see their influence because they just simply name all the places in Massachusetts after the places they left in England. So we'll end up with Ipswich and a Manchester and a Salem and a Newton and a Dedham and Plymouth and all these other places here. At first, Massachusetts Bay settled in 1620 by pilgrims who were a really, really small group. Won't grow very much until 1630 when we get a great migration that begins. And that great migration brings the Puritans that we'll spend most of our time talking about. Eventually, they spread out to what is now today Connecticut, and you can see they proceed inward along the rivers, not making native people happy along the way. More on that in just a moment. The New England model is not the same as the Chesapeake model. The New England folks, the Puritans and the Pilgrims both, are religious people, deeply, deeply religious people. And their model was to create a utopia. And in essence, you can think of the Massachusetts Bay Colony as having a utopian vision, a city on a hill, as one of them said in a sermon. This is going to be a place to create this perfect Puritan society, to be a model, to be a light for the Reformation of England itself. They'll show England how to do it, and England will look and go, oh my goodness, those people in Massachusetts, we're going to copy them. That's great. The theological world of the Puritans shapes everything. So this is not just a utopia, it's a deeply religious utopia. They come out of a tradition known as Calvinism, where people believe that only God knows who is a saved person, the elect, and this is known as predestination. Whom he did predestine, he did foreknow before the laying of the foundations of the world, the scriptures say. So therefore, there is no agency in salvation for you as an individual in the Puritan world. Your role is to basically seek God and hope you got picked. hope you get into the club. So your godly seeking is not you trying to get into heaven, it's trying to discover whether or not you've been chosen. There's a very strong emphasis on covenant. The believers must be faithful together, not individual. Individualism is not really an accepted part of the Puritan world. Everything is connected. The society is connected. The world is connected. Your behavior matters to your neighbors, not just to you. And in fact, your behavior as a group might impact your ability to create this city on a hill. So everyone needs to buy into this covenanted community. They believe in local congregational control, congregationalism. So the local city, county, town church, little village church in the town governs its believers rather than a general association, sort of like in Catholicism. The Puritans migrate as families, and this is really a key difference from the Chesapeake. This is a group of people who want to transplant their entire family world into America. So as families, they migrate is tight-knit groupings where they will have lower mortality. They'll generally better health in the New England world. Fewer illnesses, fewer deaths from disease. Many more Puritans will actually live to be grandparents and see their grandchildren. Towns tend to be very tight-knit. Families all know each other. You all know each other's business. It's a little Bexley-ish. Highly patriarchal, so it's dominated by the man, the head of the household. And it's often reflected in Puritan names for children. Puritan girls are often named things like Silence and Keep Still and Do Good. Economically speaking, New England will not thrive on lung cancer like Virginia will. New England will thrive on a mixed economy, farming, some fishing, timber, eventually even selling a lot of ships, doing shipbuilding for England. Trade, so there'll be urban areas where things can be traded. And what that's going to mean for the Puritans is a much greater social and economic equality. The very deep South is going to have the highest inequality in colonial America, whereas New England, much more equality, much more rough sense of we're almost all the same, even if we have some social differences, and somebody down the street is a little bit more wealthy. You can see the layout for New England towns is essentially, the idea is we're gathered around a central public area. This is why Worthington's laid out the way it is. It's laid out by New Englanders. So there'll be this central public square, meeting house will be there, a field, a green as they're known. People will live all along it, and then they will farm plots of land out from it. So you live in town, but your farm is spread out from that. This was not a world in which everybody was happy-go-lucky and hunky-dory all the time. So don't think that they're super religious and, oh, things are all good here, because they're not necessarily so. And part of the problem is that the Puritans were so intensely orthodox about what they wanted in their world. This is what we believe. We don't believe anything else. If you disagree, get out. So people who disagreed, who had different ideas, left the Puritan world to figure out other things. Like Anne Hutchinson, who said that God spoke to her, and the Puritans banished her because she was violating gender norms. She was acting the part of a man in her teaching as a Christian leader, Christian lay leader. And so therefore, we can't have this woman behaving in a manly way. That's not God's plan. Roger Williams, who called for a separation of church and state. He said famously that forced worship stinks in God's nostrils, that to create a theocratic world is not actually what God wants. God does not want a system of forced worship. So he is kicked out to Rhode Island, which will become a home for everybody who believes in everything and also nothing. Whatever you want, it all goes in Rhode Island. Thomas Hooker, who led the creation of Connecticut, who actually wanted stricter church membership rules. So it wasn't strict enough for him. So let's move to Connecticut and create an even more utopian utopia. The Puritans also expressed a great deal of violence towards natives. You might have recalled earlier I said that the English do not really have a place for native people in their world. And when they even go to the point of trying to convert them for Christianity, they leave them in separate places because they don't want to live near them. They don't want to intermarry them. So the English have this standoffish, kind of sort of feel for native peoples. And at the heart of really what's going on here is native people sit on land, and at some point, expanding Puritan communities are just going to want that. So limited attempts to convert natives, it's kind of half-hearted if you really look at it kind of from an honest eye. That means that when native people get in Puritans' way, they don't pray for them, they exterminate them. 1636, they almost completely eliminate the Pequot peoples, and those who don't get eliminated get sold into slavery. So the Puritans actually practice Indian slavery, and in fact, a code defining slavery will appear by 1641 in the Massachusetts Bay Body of Liberties. The most violent of the wars will be King Philip's War, in which King Philip, or Metacomb, attacks the people of the neighboring areas in the Massachusetts Bay, New England region, Connecticut, and does so because he's really tired of cows and pigs showing up in Indian gardens, constant demands for land, tired of Puritan religion. One of the most famous things that they do during the King Philip's War is they disembowel a Puritan man and shove a Bible in his abdomen. They kill cows, symbolic of here's this thing of representing English imperialism that we just don't want. But King Philip's War is also put down, and therefore, when King Philip is executed, the remaining people will once again be sold into slavery, including King Philip's wife and child. And famously, the witchcraft trials. Salem is the most egregious example, but lots of places erupted in a fear of witchcraft in the late 1680s, 1690s. So we're going to look at this in depth for an entire day and try to think about what caused this. But clearly, another episode of violence and discord, social dislocation. So not all is hunky-dory in Puritan land. There was a minister to the Indians, John Eliot, who did actually translate the New Testament into Algonquin. So this is the Up Biblum God. This is the New Testament portion. The Puritans did put an Indian on the seal of Massachusetts Bay, and it's basically the Indians saying, come over and help us. It was essentially a dishonest appeal for investment in Massachusetts Bay, even though they weren't working really hard to actually save or help native peoples at all. It's pretty half-hearted. Native peoples, as you can see here, maybe is pretty tall, are going to face a lot of settlers along the coast, moving inwards along, say, the Connecticut River in Connecticut. And when they get tired of these incursions by land-hungry settlers, violence erupts. Here is the Pequot War illustrated, where the Indians were holed up into a fort or a palisade that the Puritans actually set on fire and then shot natives as they were trying to escape running out of it. And the King Philip's conflict, or Metacom's War, which captured a great deal of folks' attention because of the threat of being exterminated, and it was this God's punishment on us. How are we being tested? Remember the Puritans, everything's filtered through religion. And then when they come out on the other side, well, they survived the test, they passed the test, and therefore this is proof of the divine resting on them in their mission. King Philip, or Metacom, who gets to be a sort of well-known figure throughout the 18th and 19th centuries. They write plays about him. He becomes part of the sort of vanishing Indian idea that the Indians just kind of disappeared, fade black. So you'll see lots of illustrations in the 19th century of King Philip. And of course, Salem, which we'll spend a lot of time on as further proof of the violence and chaos that characterize some aspects of New England life.